So what did you check out this month?
I watched White Zombie from 1932. This is a movie that pops up on a lot of horror movie lists because it's an early Bela Lugosi movie, and I think it's the first movie to deal with zombies. I could be wrong, but I think it's the first one, or at least it's the first one that people talk about. But of course, this is the voodoo kind of zombies.
Is this the movie where the term zombie originated? That might be a dumb question.
No, I mean zombies was already just a voodoo related thing. But
Okay.
for movies, I think this is the first time they showed up.
All right. You'll have to forgive my ignorance.
And I think they're not just people that are put in a trance in the movie. I think there are some that actually are people that are dug up and then turned into zombies. It's been a while since I watched it. That was at the beginning of the month, so I don't remember for sure. Given that it's 1932, it's the early sound era, and I don't know if that's why they did the movie this way, but there are long stretches in this movie with no dialogue, which was interesting, but the acting from almost everybody other than Bela Lugosi is really bad. And honestly, that's the thing that stood out to me the most watching the movie, was that it was unintentionally funny because of the acting. Other than that, and those kind of couple of historical points, it's really not worth checking out unless you're a super hardcore horror history fan or whatever. I didn't think it was very good. It wasn't bad, it just really wasn't anything special. I watched a movie from 1976 called Coma, which was based on a novel by Robin Cook and directed by Michael Crichton. So both of those people know their medical stuff, and this movie deals entirely with medical stuff. You have a bunch of patients at a hospital that undergo routine procedures but somehow end up going into comas, and this one doctor that works there, or maybe she's a nurse or something, she starts to suspect that something's going on. She finds out that they are all being taken out of the hospital to this weird facility out in the middle of nowhere, and when she goes to try to check it out, she has trouble getting in, but nobody believes her. She thinks there's some kind of conspiracy going on, and they all think she's just imagining things. It reminded me a lot of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where you don't know who is legit and who is hiding something, and it had the same kind of tone where it feels like everybody's against you and you're kind of the only one that can, I don't know, that is trying to resist everything that's going on. Rip Torn was in it, and I didn't recognize him at first. He had a pretty small part, but I was watching the scene and I said, wow, this guy's really good. And I went and looked up the cast to see who he was. And right away I saw Rip Torn's name in there and I was like, wait a minute. And I went back and looked. And I didn't recognize him because he doesn't have the facial hair that you think of.
Yeah.
And he wasn't doing the voice. He was talking like a normal
Oh.
person, which I didn't know he could do. So yeah, he was really good. The movie did get pretty implausible toward the end once you find out everything that's going on, just because the idea that they could keep everything hidden for so long and only this one girl figures things out was pretty absurd, especially because one of the connections she draws is that everything keeps happening in the same operating room. So I don't know. I would describe the movie as a mystery thriller overall, and during the scenes where you kind of have more action-y stuff going on, the movie didn't quite make those scenes convincing. You know that she has to get away to keep the movie going and everything, even though she doesn't always get away, I guess. But it's just not plausible the way she manages to do it, just the way it's portrayed. It's just not convincing. But I did like it overall. I especially liked the ending because it doesn't wrap everything up super nicely. You actually don't know exactly what's going to happen, but not in a way where you feel like you're missing something. It was very satisfying. And I actually really liked this movie as a kid. Watching it as an adult, I have no idea how that could have been possible because I can't imagine that I would have understood anything that was happening. And I would have thought I would think it was boring because it's mostly people talking. But I don't know, for some reason, I think it was the creepiness probably. Even if I didn't understand what was happening, I probably liked the creepiness about it. But yeah, I guess if you're into medical mystery thriller movies, I would recommend checking it out. It does go a little bit into the sci-fi direction, but not in a way that pushes it too far outside the bounds of reality. It's more just the plausibility, I think, of certain scenarios coming about. But it was pretty good. I watched Kingdom of the Spiders from 1977. Have you seen this movie with William Shatner?
No.
I thought this was the movie where they took a Volkswagen Beetle and turned it into a giant spider, but I think that was the giant spider invasion, so I was a little bit disappointed. But this movie turned out to be a really good bad movie. I would definitely recommend this to people that are fans of bad movies. So basically, tarantulas are becoming more well, I was going to say more deadly. They're not deadly in real life, but their venom is becoming stronger, and they are having to hunt larger prey because a lot of their prey is being killed off by pesticides or whatever. So basically, you have spiders, normal-sized spiders, attacking people. William Shatner plays the main character. I guess maybe the girl is the main character, but William Shatner is a prominent character, and he is really, really bad in this movie. If you imagine the fight with the Gorn, that is pretty much William Shatner throughout this entire movie. When he's acting like spiders are crawling on him or whatever, it's really, really funny. And his character is supposed to be likable and maybe endearing or something, I don't know. But he comes off as just a creepy weirdo. The whole movie was just the scenarios that they come up with how spiders are attacking people. There's a scene where a guy's driving and spiders are crawling on him and he doesn't notice. And the sun is not out, but for some reason he decides to put down the shade thing and a spider pops out and lands on his face. And, he drives the truck off a cliff. So it's that kind of movie. I would compare it to Slugs, maybe. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it to people that are fans of good, bad movies. I watched Night of the Devils from 1972. This was an Italian movie adapting a Tolstoy story called The Vertilac, which was previously adapted as one of the segments in The Three Faces of Fear, aka Black Sabbath, which is my favorite Mario Bava movie. But this one stretches the story out to the entire movie length, and I thought that was its biggest shortcoming. It definitely took too long to get going. I thought the first maybe half or at least third could have been cut down a lot and the movie would have benefited a lot, but it did get pretty cool. So a Vertilac is kind of like an Eastern European vampire basically, and it's the kind of movie where sometimes you don't know who is a Vertilac, who to watch out for, and basically you have this one guy that is, I think he gets a flat tire, or no, something happens with his car, and he ends up kind of stranded out in this area, which is out in the woods, and there's these people that live there, and they don't want to tell him everything about the Vertilacs, but they know that they're out there, and so to him, they're just acting kind of weird, but eventually he figures out what's going on. The movie does have some cool effects at times. Some of them are really unconvincing, but there are scenes where when they kill the Vertilacs, their face kind of decomposes, and I think what they did was they took a plastic skull and sculpted a face in wax over it and melted the wax and had like glass eyes and stuff, so you see the whole face falling apart. It was really cool. So yeah, I guess I would recommend this movie to horror fans. It's not going to blow you away, but I think it's worth checking out. I do prefer the segment in Black Sabbath though. I watched Ultraman Season 2. This is a Netflix anime adaptation of the Ultraman manga that's going on right now. I was keeping up with the manga for a while, but I gave up because I couldn't follow it. It's the kind of manga where every volume you can read in like 10 minutes, but that means that you're waiting so long for the next volume that by the time you get 3 volumes down, you don't remember what was happening. And they kept introducing new plot threads every other volume and not getting back to earlier ones. So when they would finally get back to one, that was 5 volumes ago. So I didn't know what was happening. The anime streamlines things and definitely makes it work better in terms of overall story, but it still has a lot of the same problems. So the overall idea is the main character finds out he is the son of the human host of the original Ultraman from the original show. So in that show, Ultraman had to kind of inhabit a human's body or something because he couldn't survive in our environment for more than 3 minutes at a time or whatever, which would give the fight scenes time limits. But at the end of the show, he leaves. And the manga and anime are taking place in the present, where the only Ultraman thing that has happened is the original show, so it ignores everything else in between. So this guy finds out he has super strength and super abilities a little bit, and it turns out his dad is still part of the organization that the Science Patrol that patrols for aliens and stuff. And the show and the manga end up turning into kind of like an Iron Man thing, where there's a bunch of different Ultramen, and they all have these suits, these armor suits that look very much Iron Man inspired, as opposed to Ultraman. Ultraman didn't wear a suit, he was just Ultraman. I guess maybe he wore a suit. I guess you don't know what the aliens actually look like in the original show. But they all wear these suits. There's a bunch of different ones. Some of them have different weapons and stuff like that. And initially they did kind of new versions of old Ultraman kaiju, but they all stay human-sized. There is no giant monster action in the manga or the anime. I guess there's a little bit in the second season of the anime. But for the most part, it really, again, feels more like an Iron Man kind of thing, like Iron Man crossed with Ultraman or something. And they kept doing after a while, original monsters, and even when they would bring other Ultraman characters in, they just had the name and maybe a slight design similarity to the originals, but they were essentially completely original characters. So that's part of why I lost interest too. It just didn't have anything to do with Ultraman after a while. The anime is CG, but thankfully it doesn't do the bad fake frame skipping that the Godzilla anime did. It was better overall. They really tried with the fight scenes in particular. A lot of it is motion captured, but they do that annoying thing that a lot of movies with big dumb CGI battles do, where everything is shot normally while you're watching the movie, but then you get into a big fight and all of a sudden the camera is zipping all around and doing all these exaggerated movements because everything is CGI, so you can control the camera in all these crazy ways. And even though this show is entirely CGI, it still does that complete shift of approach where you get into a fight scene and all of a sudden the camera's moving all around and it doesn't work. It's really distracting and stupid, and they really just tried to make it cool, and it was not cool. It was dumb. Thankfully, the second season, it had been a while since I watched the first one. The second season came out in 2022, and I watched the first one before we even started doing these What We Watched videos. So I didn't remember what happened, but this second season, I watched it because it was only 6 episodes. I didn't really care that much about the first season, but I figured I'd try this one out. And thankfully, it picks up in a completely new story where it doesn't seem to really carry almost anything forward from before. It's all self-contained. It does come to a conclusion. So it was better than the first season, I guess, but it still wasn't great. All the characters and the scenes and the dialogue and everything is very stock anime trope junk, and I wouldn't recommend it to even Ultraman fans because there's pretty much no Ultraman stuff in this second season. It's all original stuff. So yeah, I am definitely, there's one season coming, and they say it's going to be the last one. I'm not going to bother with it. I do not care at this point. And the outro sequence in this second season is, I mean, the whole show has a lot of the modern anime things where you have really bad themes that don't fit the show at all, and just intro sequences that feel like they're just kind of cobbled together and they don't really work. The outro sequence in this second season feels like something that you would find on YouTube that would just be like a fan-made thing, and you would hit play and immediately say, wow, that's dumb, and immediately go off to something else. But they made it the entire outro sequence. It doesn't fit anything. It is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. So definitely do not recommend. I watched Whatever Happened to Baby Jane from 1962. Have you seen this movie?
No.
Okay. I've always heard of this movie and assumed that it was particularly good.
Same.
It's definitely not bad. I would say it's a good movie for what it is. But it turns out, I think the reason it's kind of has a reputation is because of the feud between the two stars, Bette Davis and Joan Crawford. So basically, they play a pair of women that used to be kind of child stars, I guess, back in the day. And they were feuding when they were young, and now that they are adults, Joan Crawford is in a wheelchair, and Bette Davis is kind of supposed to be taking care of her, but she treats her like shit. And basically, over the course of the movie, that just escalates. There's a lot of arguing. It did go in directions that I wasn't expecting for a movie from 1962, which I'm assuming had to have been psycho-influenced to a certain extent, especially the fact that it was in black and white. It was way too long. It was over 2 hours.
Really?
And they could have cut it down to less than an hour and a half, and it would have been better. But it wasn't bad. And the acting from both of them is good. They definitely do a good job. And there was at least one unexpected twist toward the end. But honestly, by that point, I mostly just wanted it to be over because it was just too long. But it wasn't bad. I enjoyed it well enough. I watched a movie from 1934 called Murder in the Private Car. This was one of those movies that I completely pick at random. I'd never heard of this, had no idea what it was. This was about a girl that finds out that, I think she was an orphan or something, or they didn't know who her parents were, but she finds out that her dad is rich, and she's going to travel across the country to meet him because he leaves her a message. Over the course of the movie, you find out that maybe she's being manipulated by somebody, and whoever it is, I don't know. You don't find out until the end of the movie who that person is, or what their motivations are. Actually, there end up being a lot of plot threads in this movie that are unresolved. It's barely over an hour long, and I know there were some actors that I think were credited in the movie, but they didn't actually show up in the movie, so they definitely cut some stuff out. But the way it ends, I can't imagine that they would have actually answered some of the questions, because at one point, it feels like there's a supernatural element that comes in almost. But by the end of the movie, it's not supernatural, but the way it's done is never explained at all, or even brought up. But it feels like the kind of movie where you're not supposed to think about that, which is weird because it's also a mystery movie, so you're supposed to be thinking about that. So I don't know. The part of the movie that I liked was this guy that was an actor named Charles Ruggles, who refers to himself as a crime deflector. He says that instead of investigating crimes after they've happened and solving them, he steps in before they happen to stop them from happening in the first place.
Oh, that sounds like it would be very successful.
Yeah.
And not annoying.
His character is the kind of character that tries to make witty comments all the time, but what made it funny is that he often screws them up and says completely the wrong thing, so they're funny, but not in the way that he intended. And it was also the kind of movie like Little Big Shot that I talked about last month or a couple months ago, where it tries to be a mystery movie, a romance, a comedy, maybe an action movie, all at the same time. Well, maybe not at the same time, but over the course of the movie. So most of it is taking place on this train that's traveling across the country. And, I mean, there was a scene where people were getting attacked by a gorilla, which was a guy in a costume. That had nothing to do with anything else in the movie. It's the kind of movie where every couple of scenes, it just kind of turns into something else. Out of nowhere, the crime deflector starts trying to start up a romance thing with this side character. And the part that was really impressive, because for the most part the movie was just, I was kind of whatever. It wasn't, some of it didn't make sense, but it was somewhat entertaining, I guess. Toward the end, there's a big train sequence where you have one train car that's going downhill out of control and it's loaded with explosives, and it's the one that all the characters are on. So it goes through a train yard and all the operators there are adjusting all the tracks so it doesn't crash into stuff. And it was legitimately impressive for 1932 what they managed to do with that entire sequence. It was pretty cool. You do get some classic 1930s American racism, which really put me off of the movie for a while. I started losing interest a lot in the middle because there was a lot of that in the middle, and it was really stupid. If you're watching the movie, when you start getting bored, just wait for the gorilla. That's when it starts picking up again. So I don't know. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but there are things about it that I liked. I guess if you're a film history person, and especially if you like trains, I would recommend this movie. I watched the original Kamen Rider, which ran from 1971 to 1973. Given that it's a Japanese show, 2 years doesn't mean 40 episodes or whatever. It means 98 episodes.
Damn. So I imagine a lot of repetitive things going on.
Yeah, it's definitely the kind of thing where you could skip, 90 of those 98 episodes and not really miss anything important. So we talked about Shin Kamen Rider last month. I was thinking that maybe some of the weird things in that movie would eventually pop up in the show toward the end or something, but none of them ever did. Shocker in this show. So Shocker is this organization that wants to take over the world, so they kidnap people, turn them into cyborgs. Kamen Rider's a guy that got turned into a cyborg but escaped and fights against them. And then there's a second Kamen Rider partway through. There's an entire sort of side cast that helps them out. And that's part of what made the show good, is that there are so many other characters. Most of them don't get any development at all, but they're there. It keeps things moving because there are so many things to jump to if they have to. And a lot of them can actually fight. So you get some good fight scenes for a Japanese kids show from the 70s. They really did a good job of making the fights, keeping the fights interesting by staging them in interesting locations, like on roller coasters or on ski lifts or on the edge of cliffs. A lot of it looked legitimately dangerous, which also kept it interesting. So basically every episode, Shocker throws out a new cyborg, usually animal themed. After a while, they kind of said, you know what, that's not interesting enough. Let's have them be animals combined. So you had one that was half wolf and half jellyfish. You had one that was half tiger and half centipede. And if you're wondering how these combinations work, yeah, they don't. It doesn't make any sense, but that's what they did. There were some ridiculous ones. There was one that was modeled on a volcano, but it just leaves you wondering how ridiculous the next one is going to be. But they're not Power Rangers ridiculous. They're a little bit more legit than that.
I mean, you just said a volcano.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, Power Rangers feels like it's intentionally being goofy. This didn't quite feel like it was going for goofy necessarily. I like the guys that play the Kamen Riders. I like the main cast. Over the course of the show, characters will suddenly disappear, parts of the main cast, and usually never even get mentioned again and just don't show up again and will just get replaced by somebody else, which also serves to keep it interesting as it goes on because it's not always the same. And the kid from Godzilla's Revenge was part of the cast after a while. And when I say that he was much better than the kid that was there earlier, that lets you know how bad that other kid was and how annoying he was, because the kid in Godzilla's Revenge is annoying as hell.
Yeah.
He wasn't as annoying in here. This was a few years after that. I guess maybe a year or two after that. I liked the music. It was cool. It was a lot better than the music in Ultraman or Ultra 7, which feel a lot more like typical like kids superhero themes. This music fit better. And I was disappointed that Shin Kamen Rider didn't have the officer type characters that Shocker uses, like Ambassador Hell and Professor Death God, who looks like freaking Dracula. I was disappointed that those characters were not in there. Shin Kamen Rider had everything be some kind of AI thing or whatever, and that has nothing to do with the original show. That robot guy, K or whatever his name was, and there was I think they have nothing to do with the original show. That butterfly guy that was there that made up like the last half of the movie, that had nothing to do with the original show. So it just makes Shin Kamen Rider that much more disappointing for me, that it didn't really stick to the show almost at all after the first like third, maybe, after kind of introducing the general concept. So yeah, I did enjoy this a lot. 98 episodes is a lot. I don't know if I think it really needed that many, but I think I would say I prefer things like Ultraman and Ultra 7 because you have the giant monsters and this is just human-sized stuff. But I did think this was a better show, especially the fight scenes were much better. That's all I watched. I read a book called The Wrong Stars by Tim Pratt, which came out in 2017. This is the first in a series. I will not be going on to the other books. I hated this book, and actually it felt like, imagine watching the first season of Buffy, the worst episodes of the first season of Buffy, but all of the characters are played by Xander. Yeah, every single character, even if they do feel distinct in their own ways, but they all are the type of characters that are going to make really dumb jokes at the most inappropriate times. And when every single character is doing that, it is incredibly irritating. The jokes were not funny. They were just cringeworthy. It felt like it was written by a high schooler that was trying to impress his friends, maybe even throw some of his friends in the book because they all feel like high schoolers when they're not supposed to be. So the story is your stereotypical ragtag crew of this ship that's just out in space by itself. They run into another ship that it turns out was sent out from Earth like 500 years ago or something to try to find another habitable planet, and it's in a location where it shouldn't be. And there's one survivor, and they find out that when the ship flew way out into space, it encountered an unknown alien race, or at least a station belonging to an unknown alien race, that some of the other crew are still on. So they end up going to try to find that. But in the meantime, between the time that ship was originally sent out and the present, humanity has encountered a different alien race called the Liars. They refer to them as liars because they lie about everything, and they look like octopuses, basically. The reason why they lie about everything is explained, but is incredibly implausible. It felt like the kind of thing where the author came up with ideas and didn't develop them at all, didn't figure out how to actually make them work, and just kind of stuck them in the book and said, well, that's good enough. Some of the ideas were interesting, or at least could have been interesting if he had explored them. But instead, you just get, whenever they're introduced, it's like a really awkward one-page exposition scene, and then it just goes right past, and that's all you get from whatever that idea is. I hated it. I wouldn't recommend this to anybody, but I will say I read it for a book club, and all of the other people agreed with all of my problems with it, but all of them still said they would be willing to go on to the second book.
That doesn't make any sense.
I think they liked the ideas enough. The ideas were intriguing enough because that station that the one ship encountered belonged to an alien race that seems to be more powerful or more advanced than anybody else, and even the Liars are afraid of them, and the Liars are way more advanced than humans. And you find out there's one of the Liars becomes kind of a main character that does tell the truth. They used to be basically a slave race to this more powerful race, and the more powerful race seemingly disappeared, but they're worried that they're coming back now, and that's kind of where the book leaves off. So I think they were intrigued enough to be willing to go on to the next one. And again, it's clearly meant to be light entertainment, and I guess they were able to read the dialogue, which it's like 70% dialogue, without cringing as much as I was. So some of them actually said they loved it, even though they agreed with the problems, but they found it so entertaining that they wanted to keep going. So I was definitely the most negative on it. I thought it was absolutely terrible. So I don't know if that sounds good to you. If you like Xander, maybe check it out. But I really hated it. And it was the kind of thing where when you have scenes that are supposed to be tense, again, the characters are throwing out all these dumb jokes, but even the writing is a bunch of dumb jokes. So there's a scene where they're getting attacked by these metal spider things that'll get into the back of your head and get into your brain. And this one girl, one of them grabs onto her face. So instead of it being a tense scene where she has to get it off, there's jokes about her having to punch herself in the face to get it off. And then they make the same joke again. Man, and the relationship angle. The pilot of the ship that finds this other ship, when they find the survivor in there, she's in cryo sleep or whatever, and this pilot is like, oh, she's attractive or whatever, and she's like, oh no, I'm feeling something in my heart. And I was like, oh man, it was so bad. And it came up at the most inappropriate times. At the end, they find out that one of the other crew of that ship that ran into the station, one of their members got taken over by the metal spiders or whatever, and now he's evil. And you know he's evil. But the main character is more concerned about whether the girl that was in hypersleep or whatever, whether she is still in love with this other guy. In the middle of the scene where he's possibly going to kill them all and where she has to take him out before he notices her, she's like, oh man, I wonder if Elena still has feelings for him. That's what she's concerned about. So, oh man, yeah, it made me so mad. I hated it so much. I will never read anything by this guy again. So that was The Wrong Stars by Tim Pratt.
Sounds like the wrong book, if you ask me.
Yes. This is the last time that I'm going to talk about Resident Evil 2.
Yeah, right.
I played through the Claire scenario, the Claire B scenario, and I have to say I was very disappointed. The original game did a really good job of making the scenarios feel like they fit together. Obviously, they don't completely, but they really tried to make it feel like the characters are both doing things alongside each other at the same time. This game felt like they didn't care at all about that, and they just said, well, just play as the second character, and that's it. Her entire playthrough had a really awkward, clumsy structure with really weird character introductions where characters just come out of nowhere, and you get an entire scene with them, and it almost feels like you're supposed to already be invested in what's happening, but you've never encountered these characters before. And the same with when they exit the storyline, the game just kind of keeps going, and it's like, oh, okay, I guess none of that mattered. It's really weird because they have the original game to go off of, which handles everything really well, and this one just doesn't on stuff like that, on the storytelling side. I will say I did enjoy playing as Claire more than Leon, I think because she has more variety to her weapons, although it did get a little bit annoying when I had like 3 different handguns that use 3 different ammo, and that might not be quite right, but something like that, and I was just having to figure out which ones I was going to carry with me. That was kind of annoying. Playing through it as a second character really emphasized how much better the police station section is, which is the first section of the game, than the rest of the game, which is relatively slow, drawn out, and honestly kind of tedious and boring. Especially since I already played through it as Leon, playing through it as Claire, the section that is the most different is the police station, which already is the best part of the game. So now you have a second part that it is almost exactly the same as Leon's, and you just have to play through it again. The original game also, when you fight William Birkin, who's kind of the boss that keeps popping up over the course of the game, the original game had more different stages that you would fight him at, to where every time a character encountered him, you could see where it fit into the larger narrative, because he mutates more and more between each fight. But in this game, when you play through it as Leon and when you play through it as Claire, you fight the same forms every time. So it completely threw that out. And that also goes with them cutting out some of the enemies. The original game had more enemy variety. So yeah, overall, compared to the original, it's definitely a disappointment. And given that people talk about 3 feeling like a cash grab, I can already imagine what that's like, because this one, I mean, clearly this one also is a cash grab because it's just Capcom remaking a game that was popular already. They don't really have to do anything new other than just put it together. But it feels like they didn't put the thought into it that they should have. And given that I might have said this before, but given that the control scheme, the gameplay in theory is almost the same as Resident Evil 4, but Resident Evil 4 feels so much better, I think that's also just makes the game more disappointing. So I don't know, it's still good overall. I still enjoyed it for what it was, but it's not a Resident Evil game that I'm going to keep going back to and playing over again. I did try out some of the kind of bonus modes that it has. I'm not going to try to beat the hunk mode. It's kind of similar to what it was in the original game, and it definitely feels like it's more for hardcore players. I'm not really interested in that. I beat 2 of the other ones. I actually thought they were more interesting than the main game in terms of they were more enjoyable to play. because they threw in some extra gameplay elements like zombies that have backpacks with items in them, or explosive backpacks, or zombies that if you kill them when you're close to them, they'll spit out this poison at you. They kind of mixed it up a little bit, and it felt like there was more creativity in that than there was in the main game. And yeah, it's a remake. You don't want it to be too different, but it felt like it felt like they were kind of going through the motions of remaking the game in a lot of ways. So disappointing, not bad, just disappointing. And that's everything I did this month. What did you check out?
I watched The Invitation from 2022. This movie is about an everyday working girl just trying to live her life. And she's living in modern times, so living with modern struggles.
Oh, so it's a horror movie. Okay.
Actually, it is. And she does a DNA matching website thing and finds that she has relatives overseas. And wouldn't you know it, they're super mega rich. And she goes over there and everything seems too good to be true. And because it's a modern movie, she brings over her modern sensibilities and isn't afraid to speak her mind about what she thinks about everything and all that. It's a very modern movie. But then the twist comes when it turns out that this entire movie is a reimagining. Is not the right word, but I'm going to use it anyway. It is a reimagining of Dracula.
Okay, that's not expected. Okay.
Yeah, it was really weird. The movie was not good. But if you want to see a 20-something girl Leonidas Dracula into a tiny little fire to finally kill him, then this is the movie for you.
Is it a good, bad movie?
No. I guess the only redeeming quality is it was an interesting take. I watched Army of Darkness from 1992. And I'm always surprised that this movie is rated R. There are so many worse things, even at the time, that are not rated R.
Yeah, that's true.
Is it because of the violence and blood and stuff?
Yeah, maybe the blood fountain that comes out of that pit at the beginning.
And this movie makes it super clear how much Sam Raimi loves slapstick humor. This movie has so many goofy, almost wholesome humorous moments, but it's an R-rated horror movie. Like stuff I would expect to find in a cartoon or a kid's movie, like the little Ash guys running around, or his face stretching out when he picks up the wrong book.
The skeleton arms in the graveyard.
Yeah, and it's amusing that this is the same guy who did the first Evil Dead.
Yeah, I think when you think of it as a sequel to that, I mean, again, there is a movie in between, but still. I think for me, the biggest negative about Army of Darkness is that it reuses some of the jokes from Evil Dead 2, but I do still like it a lot.
Yeah, I like it a lot too. And it feels very small. There's a lot of sets that are clearly just a soundstage.
Yeah, especially, I mean, it has that huge battle at the end, but it really doesn't feel that big.
Right.
But it feels like it doesn't matter. I mean, it's not the kind of movie that you're going to be like, oh, I'm looking for a big epic fantasy thing.
Exactly. In that sense, it feels like the first Evil Dead of just a bunch of friends making a movie. I watched a movie called Inheritance from 2020. And this is that movie where Simon Pegg plays the serious role as the dude that's been in a bunker for 30 years. Do you remember seeing trailers for this?
I've never heard of this.
Okay. So there's this woman who is the district attorney for Manhattan, but she's got to be like 30 years old, which is weird because I grew up on Law & Order, and I'm used to seeing Jack McCoy characters being the district attorney, but whatever. And she's part of this super rich family, which is run by Patrick Warburton. And you know who that is, right? He's that guy who always talks like this in every comedy thing over the past 30 years.
Yeah.
But he's a serious role, too. He's actually super abusive towards his family, so that was really weird.
But see, you say that like you don't like him. I like him. I like him as the Tick and other things.
I like him, too. It was just weird that he was in this role in this movie. And he dies at the beginning. And he shocks his family by only leaving this daughter a fraction of the sum that everyone else gets. It was very relatable. She only got $1 million. And that was unintentionally funny because everybody kind of does that gasp thing and they put their hand over their mouth. And I was like, man, how is she going to survive? But she also finds out that she's been given a key to this secret bunker on their property where her dad imprisoned Simon Pegg, and he's been down there for 30 years. So she's got to figure out why he's chained up, if she should let him go, and that's the movie. The idea was there, but the execution was not really compelling. Too many beats played over and over again, and really by the end, it doesn't make any sense. So spoiler alert, He was chained up for a reason, and the father wanted him to die down there, which would have happened by default had he not performed the single action that made this story exist, which was give his daughter the key. At first I was like, well, maybe there's some kind of supernatural thing going on here, but no, he's just a dude in a bunker. And even in his recorded message to his daughter after he dies, he's like, the past must stay buried. Anyway, here's the key to dig up the past. Everything would have worked out for everybody, except for Simon Pegg, had the father just never told anybody, which kind of hurt the movie, because that was the movie. I watched Ghost in the Shell from 1995, which is a very popular movie, very highly regarded, and I actually have never seen it before.
Was it dubbed or subbed?
I only had the option of watching it dubbed, but I'm going to watch it again subbed.
See, that's why I haven't watched it. I'm waiting to find it subbed somewhere.
I'm going to find it subbed somewhere. But what really cracked me up was the description of this movie on the streaming service I was watching it on was touting up the Scarlett Johansson live-action remake. And it was like, watch this crappy cartoon, and then go watch the good one. And I haven't seen the live-action one. I really have no interest in doing that. Have you seen that one?
I have not, but I've heard mixed things about it, so I don't know.
So like I said, I've never seen this movie before or read the manga, and I know it's highly regarded, and it was good, but the whole thing felt much smaller than I expected. The story is pretty simple, and the whole thing is very straightforward, despite it including mystery elements and philosophical discussions about humanity and souls and whatnot. Its influence is really big, so maybe my lack of wonder is because I'm viewing it through a modern lens. I know it influenced a ton of stuff after it, so maybe that's an indication that it was super impactful, but I wasn't blown away. Maybe back in 95 I would have been blown away. I read a novella called Nerves by Lester Del Rey from 1942. It is about a radioactive spill, and there's a doctor and his staff who have to deal with the fallout, and it was really good. I think you would like this one a lot because there was so much science in it, and the fiction part of science fiction felt like 5%. All the actions they take, everything they have to deal with, it was very compelling.
All right, I'm sold.
On the flip side, I read Essential X-Men Volume 10, which was not really good. This was 1990 and 1991. So still majority Chris Claremont. Jim Lee kind of popped in here at this point. This was knee-deep in the era of by X-Men and X-Factor and New Mutants and Excalibur, all to follow one storyline, which was really annoying.
Mm-hmm.
And luckily, they're all included in order here. But if I was back in 1990, I would say hell no. And these storylines are drawn out so long, too. Because, if you're buying an issue of X-Men, and then you go buy an issue of X-Factor, they have to give you the whole recap of what happened in X-Men. And that's half the issue.
And there was that era where Marvel was doing that with pretty much everything, because Spider-Man was like that. They were just trying to milk things as much as they could, get you to buy as many individual issues as possible.
So Gambit's a big part of this one. And it's also when Storm is still a kid. And their huge push is fighting Shadow King, just for a little bit. There's a lot of story that is not compelling, that I don't really care, and it felt like a slog just trying to get through it. They even tie into some Fantastic Four stuff that you have to buy too. Franklin Richards is creating this alternate reality, but it's a dream or something. And he's from the past or the future, I don't know. Like I said, it wasn't compelling enough to really care. And Cable's running around with X-Factor. So they basically stop Franklin by saying, hey, you're making things really hard for everyone else. And he goes, oh, okay. After all these issues of all this crap going down. And because Franklin is there, Rachel is there. She's going through all of that, and they're just whining and complaining the whole time. It's like, whatever. Half of you aren't even real. And then the entire rest of the volume is Genosha and them dealing with Cameron Hodge. Do you know anything about him?
I'm trying to remember. Was he, working for the government or something?
He started X-Factor with Worthington, but he was actually working against Worthington because he always resented him.
Okay.
And then Angel ended up cutting his head off.
Okay, I guess I didn't get that far.
But this is when he comes back as a human head on this ridiculous, stupid-looking giant mechanical spider body.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
It's not. He just wants to get revenge on the X-Men because they caused all of his problems. X-Force. I said Cable and X-Factor, but I meant Cable and X-Force. So Rob Liefeld has a lot of art in this one, which is unfortunate. And I'm looking through it right now and just, man, why? So this story goes on forever, and long story short, they beat Cameron Hodge. And there's even one point where he puts okay, so he's still in his giant mechanical spider body that's like part of the walls and whatever, but he gets a cardboard cutout of a suit and puts it underneath his head. It's as dumb as it sounds.
Like a suit, like a business suit?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I was trying to make it make sense in my head, but okay.
Yeah, it's so dumb.
I mean, is it played for laughs?
Kind of, but it's not funny.
Yeah, it still sounds dumb.
So the X-Men end up working with X-Force or the New Mutants or one of those other groups. There's too many X groups.
Yeah, I think the New Mutants became X-Force after a while.
And every time Hodge runs into one of the X-Men, he's like, "Oh, Havoc, you're the one I want to kill the most." And then Storm pops up and he's like, "Oh, Storm, you're the one I want to kill the most." But they end up blowing him up or something. But I'm sure he's not dead. I'm sure he'll pop up again because he's too stupid. And I'm sure some dumb writer would be like, "Oh, yeah, whatever happened to him?" It's like, who cares?
I mean, you pretty much summed up all the reasons that I didn't read comics growing up in the 90s. You got the bad Rob Liefeld style art. You have storylines that are so convoluted that you can't follow them without picking up 25 different issues. And you have some really dumb characters and character designs.
Yeah. Oh, I remember why he didn't die, because he claims that a demon gave him eternal life, but he's just a head, so they end up burying him under a building. And they say, hopefully we'll never run into him again.
Oh, man.
It was not good, and there's only one volume left, and I'm hoping it's not as shitty. That's all I read. I played a game from 2021 called ElecHead, or ElecHead. I don't actually know how to pronounce it, but it's like electricity and head combined into one word. And it was really, really good. It was this fiendishly clever puzzle platformer, and I saw a trailer a while back, and I intended to check it out, and it went on sale. So I bought it, and I said, well, I'll just play it for a little bit. And I just played the whole thing in one sitting. It was so good. So the premise is you are this little dude, and your body carries an electrical charge. And when you're in contact with something, that charge carries through that object or that wall or the floor or whatever you're touching. It's like an electrical circuit. And the game is pretty linear. It's set up as just rooms, and each room is a puzzle, and you got to figure out how to use that charge to activate a platform or to get something to move so you can get to the next room. And it's never infuriatingly difficult. It was a really, really good balance and designed so well. And the mechanics make sense, and I was really happy how the game made full use of the few rules it set up for itself. And the pacing is really good. And then at one point, you gain really the only ability you have, which is to throw your head away from your body, but you still move your body independently, and your head is the only thing that carries a charge. So it just cranks up the puzzle factor to 1,000, and it was such a good game. And once you do it once, you can kind of go back and do it again in really not that much time at all. So it's really enjoyable to play through it yourself. And then I have watched other people do it too for the first time, and it's just really enjoyable. I played the newest iteration in the Puzzle Bobble series, which is Puzzle Bobble Every Bubble, which is a dumb title. And it came out in 2023. Are you familiar with Puzzle Bobble?
No.
It is a spin-off of the Bubble Bobble series, and it's a puzzle game where there's a tall column with a bunch of different colored bubbles on the top, and you are at the bottom, and you shoot different colored bubbles up, and the goal is just to make chains of colors to make them disappear, and everything's slowly moving down, and you just have to clear the stage, clear the bubbles before everything reaches the bottom and you lose. And this is the latest iteration, so it's all, modern and crap. And I was playing with somebody else, and we were doing versus like you can do, and I found that the main story has a co-op version where you're actually working together to clear stages, which was cool. I don't know if that's the first time they've done that, probably not, but it's the first time I've seen it done in this series. And I saw you could even bump it up to 4 people, and if you didn't have more human players, you could play with the computer, which I thought would be interesting. But it turned out to be the most infuriating / hilarious experience ever, because the computers are supposed to be working with you, but they don't know what you're trying to do, and sometimes they just interfere, and it was really, really fun playing with somebody else in the room. Like, if I'd been doing it me with 3 computers, I would just quit. But the fact that there were 2 of us, we were just cracking up at how the computers were actually making things harder for us. It was really, really fun. And if you had 4 human people, I imagine you'd just be screaming at each other instead of screaming at a person that doesn't actually exist.
I do like those kind of bubble popping games and stuff, so I'd probably like it.
It's because you're a child. I played Actraiser Renaissance from 2021, which is a remake of Actraiser from 1990, I want to say. Actraiser is a very unique game, and it's always on the list of super good games that people just don't really know about. And it came out really early in the Super Famicom life cycle, and it's a combination of action platformer and God simulator, which is just a weird combination, but the way they do both is really good. And I discovered it by accident as a kid. I saw it probably at some Blockbuster or something, and I brought it home, and I was like, oh, it's like a platformer. But then you clear out the area of demons or whatever, and then you do a up above view looking down on the continent, on the land. And there's this angel that's like, hey, you cleared out the demons. Let's help guide these people to like build their civilization. And I was like, wait, what? And I just kind of went with it, and it was really good. And it easily went up to my list of like really good games for that console. And it was developed by Quintet, I want to say, but published by Enix before they had their merge with Square. So they remade it in 2021, and I was excited to play it because I was like, all right, well, what did they change? What did they add? And they added so much content, some of it a plus and some of it not. So there's a ton more story for every area you're in. They added a tower defense mechanic. They added more platforming. And the biggest addition was the amount of dialogue. There's so much dialogue, and it's really well written, but there's too much. I'm trying to guide these people to freaking build their civilization. They keep bothering me every 5 seconds with like, hey, can you get us some apples? Or hey, can you get some wood? Or hey, can you make a leave me alone. I think the thing I said the most while playing this game was a sigh followed by what? What is it? But it was still really good. And the platforming parts, they added in these extra mechanics to make it feel more modern. But what I really liked is you can turn that extra moveset off if you want it to feel more classic. And Yuzo Koshiro did the music for the original one, and he came back to do the arrangements for this one. And my favorite part is not only that the music is still really good, there's about 10 to 15 new tracks that did not exist because there's all this extra content. And he actually made Super Famicom versions of these tracks as well. So if you're listening to the classic music style, there's actually these tracks that didn't actually exist back then but now do, which is really cool. So the game is not super long. It's definitely longer than the original. And I was happy to find they added like a whole new area after you complete the core game. Really worth playing. I played Sonic Origins Plus. Sonic Origins came out in 2022, and the Plus thing came out in 2023. Which is yet another collection of classic Sonic games. And this one has 1 CD, 2 and 3. Now I have these games on 200 consoles. And it just really makes me laugh how whenever another Sonic game is announced, because they make one freaking every year, everybody goes, you know, it finally looks like they're going to turn around and come back to like the classic whatever. And then it comes out and people are like, yeah, this game actually isn't very good. And then Sega will announce the next one, and people will be like, finally, it's about time they got back to the classic, whatever. And then it comes out, and people are like, yeah, you know, this game isn't really very good. For 30 years, we've been playing this game. I don't understand why people keep saying it. The last good Sonic game was Sonic Mania, which wasn't even made by Sonic Team. It was made by fans, and then it was so good, Sega said, okay, we will let you do this. But then typical Sega, once it was successful, they stepped in and said, okay, we'll take it from here.
I mean, that honestly feels like a lot of video game company approaches nowadays.
So I played through, some of these. 2 definitely has the best music. 3 has the best gameplay. It's the best refined out of the first 3. And they didn't include Sonic and Knuckles on this collection. I'm not sure why. And there's classic versions of these and anniversary versions of these. And anniversary adds widescreen, and it adds Amy as a playable character. But even the classic versions aren't really the authentic classic versions. They're like updated classic versions. And for Sonic 3, they had some music right issues or something, so they couldn't even use the original music. It just feels like a lackluster, half-assed collection of classic Sonic games, which pretty much describes every collection of classic Sonic games for the past 20 years. There's always things that are wrong, or new bugs introduced, or things that just don't make sense of why they included it or didn't include it, and everyone just has to settle. But then they'll do it again in another couple of years, and they're running out of words. You got Sonic Origins, Sonic Classic, Sonic Premier, Sonic X-Force.
Designed by Rob Liefeld. Sonic will just have 2 giant guns.
And the plus side of it is you can download its DLC 12 Game Gear Sonic games. And I saw this list somewhere of let's rank the Sonic Game Gear games from best to worst. And I'll do it for you. They're all terrible. Game Gear itself is pretty f***ing terrible. So Game Boy was out. And Sega said, yeah, we're going to make a handheld, but it's going to be in color. And it's going to be backlit. And it's going to be sweet. It is a perfect encapsulation of what video games were for way too long, where they said, you know what, we're going to put the most power and have the best graphics, and it's just going to be the most powerful system that will make us the best. But if you have no good games, then it's a total waste. I mean, look at the freaking 3DO, that thing everybody has, because it was so powerful.
I was going to say you summed up Microsoft's approach in a lot of ways. At least before. I haven't been keeping up with the Xboxes, but that's kind of how the first one was.
I mean, I remember as a kid, someone on the school bus one year had a Game Gear, and I had a Game Boy, and we would swap on the bus, like on the way home from school. And after about 15 seconds, I was like, give me back my Game Boy, man. This thing sucks. Because I don't know if you've ever played a Game Gear. Yeah, it is in color. Yeah, it is backlit, but you can't see anything on that thing. And the batteries last, I think it was like 6 AA's, and it lasts maybe 20 minutes.
Yeah, the only time I ever used one actually was also on the bus, borrowing it from somebody, and I do remember the batteries running out all the time. I think it was a Power Rangers game that he had on there. I think that was maybe the only game he had, because that's the only one I remember.
I think the only positive to these games being included on this collection is you can see them large and with proper lighting, and you can see how they actually, could have looked. But even then, I'm looking at them being like, these games look bad. Like, yeah, you can pack in some pre-rendered sprite work or whatever, but it looks like shit because it's on a Game Gear. And you have to compress everything. And man, when you start up some of those games, they have the vocal Sega logo thing. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I remember that.
And it is so highly compressed and loud. Man, I thought the devil himself was coming out of the speakers. It was just so awful. And I'll play it here for you. Just maybe you should mute this video because I'd rather summon Candyman than have to listen to that thing. So yeah, yet another Sonic collection that is not worth your money. And I've still been playing Tears of the Kingdom a lot. I've been working on getting a bunch of armor sets, doing a lot of exploring, finding the last few shrines, and I'm going to do the last fight pretty soon, and I think that's going to be it. Because I played Breath of the Wild to death, many, many, many hours, definitely got my time's worth out of it, and I've never gone back to it after the fact, because it was just so huge, and I did everything I ever wanted to do. And I feel like this is going to be the same way. Like, I put in so many hours into this game, and it's definitely worth it, but I can't see myself going back later and doing it again. Super good game.
I didn't talk about this, obviously, but I am playing Breath of the Wild.
Yeah?
It's still early on, but yeah, I am enjoying it.
Yeah, I think that's a game where, when I was playing it at least, I couldn't be playing other games at the same time. I had to focus everything on that. So I know you don't do that, so I'm interested to see what happens. I think you're just going to putter out and stop.
Yeah, I didn't used to, but that's kind of how I'm doing it now. Although, as you say that, I'm remembering that I never finished Final Fantasy VI. I forgot all about it until just now.
Yeah, how many times have you restarted that one?
Yeah, I will play it some more. There's one more mode on Resident Evil 2 that I have to beat. I haven't even tried it yet, so we'll see if I actually do that. But I'm mostly focusing on Breath of the Wild, partially because everybody at work keeps talking to me about Tears of the Kingdom and whatever, and I'm just like, all right, fine, I'll play the first one.
So your statement about being done about talking about Resident Evil 2 was a lie because you're going to do it later after you finish this mode.
No, I'm not. No, I doubt I'll bring it up.
All right. Well, it's being recorded, so I'll be able to prove you wrong next month.
This isn't supposed to go in.
And that's all I did this month. So that's June, halfway through the year.
Hopefully by the time you watch this, we will be somewhat caught up. We are trying. I know we say that all the time, but we legit are trying.
Well, we're getting close to actually finishing Star Trek stuff for the TNG series, so maybe we will be caught up.
But again, we will be doing more Star Trek stuff eventually, so we don't want that to sound like we're done with Star Trek, just in case.
Thanks for watching.